All right, Landon, I'm going to give you share screen capabilities. Oh, geez, now there's 4 of me or something.
Hey, Leonard, it's Karen. I think one of them's me. I'm trying to rename.
Yeah, I don't know what just happened with Zoom.
Yeah, I don't know either, but I'm still Leonard, and I'm gonna take a picture of it because this is a big moment for me.
That's so funny because I already took a picture of it.
Double Leonard.
Yeah, there we are.
Okay.
That's so funny. I was laughing at how many letters there were, and then I'm like, oh wait, is that me?
Oh, because maybe y'all are the co-host,
Could
maybe
be.
perhaps. Because I think it's the meeting invite reasons.
Anyway, we're good now.
It's all good.
Yeah, I think that's what ended up happening. So apparently our presentations are due to CPSC by Monday. So this is the dress rehearsal for your slide deck. And I'm hoping for karaoke night to be Wednesday night. Landon, you're going to be the socials lead and determine where dinner is on that Wednesday night.
I got you, brother.
San Antonio's thinking of going to Animal Kingdom before all the festivities start on Monday, if we arrive early enough. I'm thinking Epcot. But of course, the most important thing is education tracks and just learning from each other. Having a presentation ahead of time like this also frees up, like, Landon, please don't be offended and Karen, don't be offended if I don't attend your session, if I already seen it here.
Heard.
Completely understandable, Leonard.
But yeah, I would say go ahead. We can do quick introductions real quick, but since there's a small group today, but I'm Leonard, Houston Fire Department and the Texas CPS chair for hopefully less than 2 more months, because I'm going to put in the bylaws term limits unilaterally. Unilaterally, but unwritten. All right, Lane, we can go with I know some people are multitasking, but if anyone wants to introduce themselves, starting with Jennifer, go ahead.
I am actually not multitasking. So Jennifer Henniger, I am with City of Temple's Temple Fire and Rescue. I am the accreditation manager and emergency management coordinator.
All right. Chief Ramon. All right, we'll go with Willie Berger.
Yes, I'm a deputy fire marshal with the city of Waco. I was asked to be on here and attend for representation for the city of Waco.
All right, Albert.
Hi, Albert Lee, Austin Fire Department. We've recently started trying to up our efforts toward accreditation, so we're hoping to learn some useful information to that end.
Laura? Monzi? Okay, Laura, go ahead.
Sorry, mute issues. I'm Laura Ayers. I also work for the fire department at Austin with Albert.
Good, Monzi. And Justin.
Good afternoon. Justin Ducey here, Fire Marshal Leawood, Kansas, a couple states north of you here. I'm the HOA Heart of America Accreditation Consortium Chair. So got your invite and thought we'd see what your consortium's doing.
All right.
Nice, man.
Yeah. So Landon and Karen, you're up. Introductions, and go ahead, and we'll critique because this is dress rehearsal time, no pressure.
Well, here we'll do introductions as part of the presentation, so I'll get us rolling. Can y'all see that?
Yes, sir.
But only as if you're editing still.
There you go. Not quite.
How's that?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, then we'll just jump right into it. I'll start. I'm Landon Churchill with Spring Fire Department. I'm a deputy chief here, and I'm also our accreditation manager. I was an accreditation manager in Colorado before this. And I also do a lot of work in community risk reduction, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So, and that's why I'm really stoked to be working with Karen, who is a real expert. in CRR. So I'll let her introduce herself.
Oh, well, thank you, Chief. Karen Berard-Reed. I am the CRR lead at NFPA, and I've had the opportunity to do a lot of work with a lot of different fire departments and communities in the community risk reduction space, and we'll tell you a little bit about where that's landing these days.
Outstanding. So actually, before we go into this, so our topic of performative CRR, one of the things that I see as a peer assessor that ends up as a recommendation fairly frequently is that a lot of fire departments, when they go for accreditation, they're not tracking outcomes very well. And as we know, you're required to measure outcomes and use data to drive your CRR initiatives. And so a lot of times when I'm doing assessments, and Leonard can chime in if he's seen the same thing, they'll be tracking parts of the puzzle, but not the entire puzzle. And so that ends up with a recommendation. So this is a fairly frequent problem that we see in category 5, and that's why we're addressing that. So maybe Karen, if you want to jump in on this one.
Sure, absolutely. We always find it helpful to kind of level set when we talk about community risk reduction, because it's definitely one of those phrases that has become a bit of a buzzword. And if you have 10 people in the room and ask them for a definition, you might get 10 different definitions. So being from NFPA, we definitely lean on NFPA 1300, which is the standard on community risk assessment and community risk reduction plan development. If you've ever had a chance to peruse it, either in the hard copy or in link, you know it's a pretty concise document, which I really, really love. Easy to read, easy to follow, and just provide some good foundation about the fact that when we talk about community risk reduction, we're talking about a process. And some key underpinnings of that include that it is the process to identify and then prioritize local risks. Then using that information to strategically plan to reduce the occurrence and impact of those risks. So this graphic really just highlights the idea that community risk reduction, as guided by NFPA 1300, starts with that critical first step of the community risk assessment, and then leads to a community risk reduction plan to address the risks that are prioritized. Partners and stakeholders should have voices in every step of the process. And it's also important to note that NFPA 1300 really guides an all hazards approach. So that means that a community might do a community risk assessment and have conversations about the data and realize that some of their priority risks don't fall directly in the fire bucket, right? They might be related to drowning. They might be related to motor vehicle crashes. They're likely somehow related to EMS. So really opening up the lens for that. And then thinking about how the community risk reduction process ties into data-informed practice can lead to impactful interventions. As Landon was saying earlier, we know that a lot of folks will do a lot of things, but not necessarily know if those things are impacting the risk in the community. This process helps with that. It also helps with efficient and equitable deployment of resources and leans on the need to evaluate those initiatives along the way and at the end to determine if outcomes have been met.
Yeah, and the thing I would add to that is that, as we know, one of the things we have to do through an accreditation process is show why we do something the way we do it. And a great answer to, hey, why is your community risk reduction program set up this way, is we're following NFPA 1300. A lot of people don't know that it's there or that there is a standard for this. Most of the people that I have done peer assessment for don't know that this exists at all, or that there is a standard that they can point to. So that really adds some more substantive evidence from an accreditation perspective on the entire front end of category 5.
Thanks.
You want to keep cooking here?
Yeah, so we also wanted to kind of highlight the idea that we can differentiate between community risk reduction as a process and risk reduction activities. Because one of the loopholes we can kind of fall into in working with communities and fire departments is the idea that they might feel like, well, everything we do is community risk reduction. And that's truly not the case if it's not attached to a data-driven process, if you're not doing that assessment up front, if you're not engaging partners and stakeholders. Those are all important components of the community risk reduction process. What you may be engaging in are risk reduction activities, right? So activities that attempt to reduce the likelihood of an event happening and reduce the seriousness of the effects should exposure to a hazard occur. Those risk reduction activities are all over the place, and they range from doing things like falls prevention programs and cooking fire prevention initiatives. Some people might even say fire department open houses have a risk reduction activity component. But if they're not part of that overall strategic process, then as standalone activities, we don't want to say that they're the same thing as CRR. Okay, we really want to look at that whole stream of activities that are connected together through that process.
Absolutely. And so to build on that, an important and useful way to look at the work that you're doing is by objective, because we don't have common vocabulary on what community risk reduction means. Some people call it public relations, others are calling it community engagement, outreach, fire prevention, public information, and life safety education. This is kind of a mishmash, throw everything in one pot, and depending on which fire department you're talking to, any one of these things could mean any objective. So there are three main objectives that you can be targeting. The first is public sentiment management. So if you're trying to make the public like you more, support you more, have more positive sentiments towards you, that's a very worthwhile goal, but that's a very specific objective. And that's usually tied to things like public relations or outreach. Public safety is a totally different objective that's trying to keep people safe, reduce their risk, make it less likely that they or their property will be harmed or damaged. That's a very specific objective, and that ties to community risk reduction directly. The third one is public knowledge. That's the public knowing more things than they knew before, specifically about fast-moving, dynamic, current events. And that's what public information really is. And so I know that many organizations have their PIOs do a lot of what they call CRR work, or maybe the PIO is in charge of their outreach programs, or the life safety educator is also the PIO. There's a lot of conflation between these things, and that creates confusion. There is also intersectionality. As you can see, that's why we used a Venn diagram. When you increase people's public knowledge, you are making them safer. When you make them safer, you are improving public sentiment. Sometimes you're doing all three. But when we don't know which one we're targeting, we put ourselves into a bit of a bind. An example would be if you're going to your local high school for some sort of a spirit night and you put up a tent and you give out fire department swag. You tell me, pop it in the chat, what is that? I don't know if I can still see the chat. Karen, can you see the chat?
I can see it, so I'm happy
Not you.
to. Yeah,
Oh, I can do it.
there we go. Justin says public sentiment.
Yeah, that's a public sentiment strategy. And that's good, right? You have to make sure you're managing public sentiment. It's important that your public likes you and supports you. Now, let's say you go to that same spirit event and you teach hands-only CPR at your tent and you give away chapsticks with the fire department logo. Now, what are you doing? I will wait for you because I care about you. Yeah, and to that point, like we do want a little bit of interaction on this because we'll be asking our audiences there. See, Justin's my man. He's got me. Yeah, so now you're mixing those things. Good. Nice. Thanks, Leonard.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. And so we're increasing their knowledge, and we also know that if we increase their knowledge a little bit and they know CPR now, maybe someone's a little bit safer, maybe their family members and their colleagues are a little safer because they have that skill. Now, we're going to get to how you track whether that intervention made a difference a little later, but it's important to be realistic and precise about what you're accomplishing with each of your programs. It doesn't really matter what you call it. What matters is what what you're doing. If you know that you're doing public safety stuff, but you call it outreach, that's fine. You can call whatever you want to. So this is a fun thing. We've got a stakeholder, what's in it for you, what's in it for us matrix. One of the things that's really important in risk reduction is that we speak to people in their language and we transact in their currency. So if we stick to the overt once, which is kind of the ideal world, this is a lot of that ideology that CRR talks about, and it sounds really good, and it's all very shiny, and it's about how we can make everything better, right? The firefighters, oh, we want the people to be safe, and then the fire chief wants people to be safe, the residents that we want to be safe, and that's mostly what we talk about with CRR. It's like we're making a safer community. But if you ignore the covert wants and desires of these stakeholder groups, you're gonna have a really hard time getting traction. An example would be firefighters know that the right answer to the question is, yeah, we want the community to be safer. But a real reason they might support CRR is that they don't have to go on as many nuisance calls. Maybe they get to focus on firefighting, which is what they really like to do, instead of installing smoke alarms, which they don't love to do. So if you're trying to sell it, sometimes moving away from the ideology, like the rainbow and unicorns version of CRR, and getting a little bit more nitty gritty and saying, hey, here's how you actually benefit. Talking to your local government and saying, hey, this is going to help you get reelected. This is not just going to make the community safer, but this is going to translate into votes for you. And we know that's what you want. We know your fire chief wants a feather in their cap because they did a cool program that nobody else had thought of. That's a motivating factor for them. Everybody does want a safer community, but very good, Jennifer. You got to speak to what's important to them. Excellent. Karen, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would just say about that, I think sometimes there's this hesitancy to do that, to kind of pull away the curtain and really look at what makes people satisfied in their roles and what helps them meet their objectives. Because the reality is sometimes we have parallel objectives, right? Maybe they're not all exactly the same, but we can get to the same place, which is a safer community, by satisfying all of those parallel objectives, if you will. I think it's okay to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. So I will ask the group now. Tell me how you measure success. Pick any one of these or a couple of these and put in the chat how you measure whether or not that program is successful for you. If you're doing plans review, how do you know that it's working? If you're doing station tours, how do you know that it's helping? If you're doing car seats, whatever you're doing, tell me how you measure success in that program. I'll give you a quick second to think about it and type it in. Very nice. Jennifer says an attendance metric for outreach events. How many people came, right? Good, right? So measuring bystander CPR before EMS arrival, that's wonderful. If you could follow up where they received their training. Ooh, I like it, Justin. I like what you're doing there. Good, you can track fire incidents in the neighborhoods from a canvassing event for smoke alarms. Very good.
Laura, what would you track?
Sounds like the number, we're talking number of fire incidents in the geographic region. Is that what you're saying? Sure. So severity, like, does it early detection, maybe? Did it stay in the compartment of origin? Okay,
Yeah,
I'm into it.
Yeah, no, it's such an interesting thing because I think it just goes back to that, making sure that we're aligned with the goals. I had an interesting conversation years ago at NFPA headquarters with someone who was working part-time for us, but was also a fire captain in a community, and was talking about wanting to install do a smoke alarm installation blitz and was trying to get their program down on paper. Chelsea Rubidoux, I work closely with. I said, well, what are your goals? And he said, well, I want to reduce the number of fires. And we just gave him a moment. And it's like, well, smoke alarms aren't going to reduce the number of fires that occur. If you're talking about providing early warning to people in those homes where the fires might occur, then that's something that's going to work, but you just have to make sure that intervention matches the goal that you have. So yeah, I like that idea when you're thinking about the severity of the fire incidents.
Yeah. Tremendous. This is a good conversation. We're going to expand on it. So what that looks like, we have to be able to differentiate between three things: an output, an impact, and an outcome. An output is the straight up output of the program. So that is, how many smoke alarms did we install? How many people came to our thing? How many safety events did we hold? How many code violations did we find on our inspections? Number of calls for service, that's our classic output. We say, somebody says, well, I'm paying millions of dollars for my fire department. What do you do for me? Well, we ran 10,000 calls last month. That doesn't answer the question what we do for you, but we feel like maybe it does. So that's an output. And many programs don't get past outputs. Impacts are a little trickier because sometimes you can measure whether your outputs did anything, right? If you're doing an education program, you can test their knowledge before and after and see that their knowledge has changed. Maybe they know more things about safety behaviors than they did before. Maybe there are not as many violations as there were prior to your enforcement program. Maybe you know that you've covered an entire area with smoke alarms. And so you have a geographic region that is covered with an emergency resource or a smoke alarm program or a different area that's covered by an intervention. But the question we're trying to answer is, did that make anything better? People who know about fire safety plans, are they more likely to get out of their houses? How do we know that? Do reduced violations translate to fewer fires in businesses that are inspected? That's a little bit harder to check. So we're going to dig into what that could look like. Karen, anything to add on that one?
No, one of the things I was just thinking about, and I know you're going to talk about it in a minute, is just the whole idea. And I love that someone talked about inspections in the chat. Inspections and investigations even provide a wealth of data that often goes untapped. So that's
Absolutely.
If I had the look of, I need to say something interesting.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
You always say something interesting when you speak.
Well, sometimes it's okay to stay in my head though.
So this is kind of the crux of this presentation, and it's what the title is about, is the difference between effective CRR and performative CRR. And it's a chance to really be honest with the programs that you're running and ask yourself where they fall. Most programs are a little bit on both sides. So this is a quick self-check that you can run. Ask yourself about the demand for the program. Whatever your program that you're running, how do you know the community needs it? Remember, in accreditation, one of the things that most peer assessors will ask you is, why are you doing that and how do you know it's good for the community? And if your answer is, I don't know, we just kind of assumed they needed it, right? Everyone else is doing a CPR education program, so I assumed that that was a problem for us as well. Well, how do you know? So effective CRR programs, you have documented data showing this is a problem here. There's a demand for this program. An example that I gave recently to Karen, and we had a great conversation about that we're bouncing around, is baby boxes. We're trying to decide if we're going to put baby boxes in our fire stations, which are those air-conditioned boxes for safe haven newborn deliveries. And we've never had any newborns dropped off. But then Karen said, just because you've never had any newborns dropped off does not mean there's not a demand for that thing. That's not actually a very good metric. Are there babies being dumped? Are there at-risk populations in the area? So you want to be thorough about how you assess demand. Just because there's not a surface level demand doesn't mean there isn't demand. And then you have to ask yourself, who am I doing this for? Who's the target audience? Who's my end user for this program? As a CRR professional, I've been working in CRR for a long time. We all want our end user and our target audience to be the community and the betterment of the community and meeting their needs. But we also know that a lot of times you end up building programs for your boss to make your boss, whether that's a fire chief or a division chief or whatever you've got, a lot of times it's because they like the idea. You have to get their buy off on it. They saw it at a conference and thought it would be cool. They're trying to impress somebody. It's a lot of times we are attenuating our programs to meet the needs of our supervisors. That's not effective. That's performative. It's effective if we're doing what the community needs, whether or not it meets our boss's aesthetic taste or not. And I totally understand what a tricky position that puts people in. Then we have to ask, what are we trying to do? We talked about that earlier. Are we trying to impact public sentiment? Are we trying to make people safer? In what way are we making them safer? So if you're not sure what you're trying to accomplish, or you're mixing objectives, it's probably more performative. If you know exactly what you're trying to accomplish, that's going to work. The intervention, is it actually functional, or is it flashy and fashionable? A lot of things that we see these days, things that we call CRR are really, really flashy, and they make good news stories, and it's about giveaways and cool swag and getting a lot of people or a big reach, and it's about getting that headline. That doesn't necessarily mean it's working. So if you're chasing headlines or trying to blaze trails, you may not actually be effective. And the last is that metrics. If you're only measuring outputs and impacts, you're probably just putting on a show. What we want to be doing is knowing whether or not the work we're doing changed anything for anybody on the other end. If the outcome was different than it would have been without the intervention. Karen, anything to add?
Yeah, so it brings me back to last year's Community Risk Reduction Leadership Conference, where we were having so many really great conversations about this type of information and about what community risk reduction looks like and what's involved in the process. Really great. And then someone that I didn't see did a presentation and talked about a stop, drop, and roll event in which a community was working to break the world's record on the number of people who were simultaneously conducting stop, drop, and roll. And so many people came into my next session all excited and saying that this is what they were going to do with their community risk reduction initiatives. It wasn't a good moment for me. Because it was these kinds of conversations that we then had to have. That why do you want to do that? What is your goal? What are the outcomes of that? And do your goals and those outcomes line up? Right? Like an event like that could be a wonderful PR event for a community. But if you're saying you're doing it as a CRR initiative and you're trying to make your community safer, that's not likely to line up. And so I really like this framework to help people work through that set of questions and really examine if what they're doing and planning to do is going to get them to where they want to be.
Awesome. Yep. Nice, Leonard. And to your point, right? There's always a question about whether you're doing harm with an intervention. Because if showing kids how to play with fire, the outcome is that they play with fire more, that's not great. If teaching stop, drop, and roll teaches kids to roll out of their burning house, which we've seen, then maybe getting 10,000 people in a fairground to do it isn't helpful. It's just a publicity stunt. And these are hard conversations.
Yeah. And I think it's also really important to normalize failure sometimes as well. Like this shows the true value of evaluation, Leonard, that you are willing to look at something and say, well, we better figure out if this is actually working. And when you find out it's not, you pivot and you change direction. If you never evaluate, then everybody's just kind of going along and assuming that things are working, when in fact they could actually be making the community less safe. So, and you're not alone. I remember I started my career as a elementary education, health education teacher. And there was a video that was mass produced floating around at the time called "Don't Play Games with Fanny Flame." And come to find out, it had a similar effect as your puppet show. So evaluation is important.
Very good. So here's a question. Whatever you were looking at before, whatever the program you talked about earlier, just type out real fast. How do you know there's a demand? Who's your audience for it? What are you trying to accomplish? What's the intervention that you're using? And is it specific and intentional? And what are the metrics? Over here on this side, this is another set of nomenclature that is sometimes used in college courses, or Vision 2020 uses it. It's the same process, if that's something you know about. So here we're just applying the tool real fast to whatever program you were working with.
Landon, can you back up one slide?
I can do anything.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that helps. Maybe I'll add that in.
I just made a note. I said, oh, that would be helpful, that visual when we go through this activity.
I hope they're typing. They're either typing or ignoring us.
I don't know.
Zoom doesn't have that thing that the iPhones have where it tells
Little
us.
dots, yeah.
Yeah. I think they're working. Justin for sure is working. Nice, Justin. Very good.
Mhm. So should a person require CPR, does the number of events that occur with a bystander performing CPR increase as a metric? I know that was really wordy, but, and I'm wondering now, is that something that is tracked?
Say it one more time.
If you arrive on scene
Mhm.
and you have a patient who would have benefited from CPR, is it tracked whether or not they are receiving CPR?
Great question. Justin, are you doing that? Tracking bystander CPR in your PCRs? It sounds like yes from your earlier comments.
Okay. Yeah. Not previously, but the new one will. Okay.
Good.
In the
So
next
you,
one. Okay.
yeah, that works.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a question for you, because this I'm having the same exact challenge. How do you know how much of your community knows CPR? Like if you're offering certification courses and hands-only CPR events, right? Those are the mechanisms to get the education out. How do you know where those trained people end up? Geographically speaking, like are they, yeah, it's tricky, right? It's really hard to know where, like what it, so for an event, like if you're doing an event, are those people coming from out of district and then going back out of district, because that won't help you.
But similarly, you could have people in your community who participate in out of district training and then come and live in your, or they could be visitors as well. So it is,
Yeah.
it is complex.
Yeah, tracking, then that's where that impact piece comes in, because knowing how many people know CPR is its own metric. And then knowing whether or not they're using it is a third metric. Yep, self-reported versus actually tested knowledge. Good one, Leonard. Yep.
Mm.
The
And
airport.
so
Go ahead.
I might ask, I'm just curious about your thoughts on this. In this case, clearly we know the outcome is valuable, and I feel pretty comfortable about this, being able to compare how frequently CPR is performed when it needs to be performed as a valuable data point. I don't know if tracking the number of certification courses, while it's an important process piece, is it going to get you what you need in terms of
Yep.
assessing knowledge?
Mm-hmm. True story, but it's a good way of doing impact, and I like it, Justin. You're gonna keep cooking here.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
So now we're going to talk about just a basic process of measuring that call that didn't happen. How do you know? And you've already alluded to a lot of it as a group. So first you're going to figure out that demand piece, and then you're going to get your baseline. Where are we now? Because you can't know if you've made it better if you don't know where you're at. Then you're going to figure out what you're going to do about it. What's the intervention? You're going to implement that thing and see what it did. Interpretation of that data, as we've been talking about, that's one of the hardest, and that's the art of CRR. And then you adjust and try again. To Karen's point, a lot of CRR initiatives don't work the first iteration. So most of them you have to adjust and pivot. So a great example is the CPSC 3-axis method for risk. You can do whatever risk assessment that you want, but this is a great way to know how bad a thing is. And you can use it beyond just what we do in accreditation. You can use it for your CRR initiatives. So if you're talking about CPR, how much life and property are we talking about? How many resources does that soak up and use for you? How often does it happen? And that's a question. Let's just look at the consequence. So how much relative to the other risks in the community, out of hospital cardiac arrest, what's the consequence of that? Is it big consequence? Little like 0 to 10, where are we at? What do y'all think? It's a little bit of an accreditation trick question, because it all depends on your scale, which you have to build and use. Because without a scale, you don't really know, because everything is relative to everything else. And so in accreditation, when we look at your 3-axis method, you're going to give your risk a score. And here we would probably give out of hospital cardiac arrest a 2 or a 4, because it might be a bunch of people depending on your numbers in your community, but it's not going to be like major life hazard to a large group of people. And so here it's not a lot, but it might be, and even so, it's probably more of a 2, because most out of hospital cardiac arrest impacts one person. However, it might be very, very frequent if it happens all the time in your community. And then it also is not usually a huge resource eater. So you can use this to decide where the demand actually is. And a lot of people, when they go through the accreditation process, they find that they're putting a lot of resources in places that they intuitively and anecdotally felt were big problems in their community, but maybe they couldn't put any data behind that. Karen, you want to talk about this one?
Sure. So,
All right, good. Go ahead.
yeah, I'm sorry. I was like, I don't remember this slide.
Oh, but I can do it.
Okay, go ahead.
I got you. Yeah. So then we're just looking at like, where are we now? everything that we've talked about so far, you have to know your baseline. So if the goal is to decrease the number of fires, how many fires are there now? How many people are dying or being injured in those fires? And this is where, if we're talking about smoke alarms as our specific question here for our little case study, to what we were talking about earlier, is number of fires an applicable metric for a smoke alarm intervention? Because to your point, smoke alarms don't stop fires. Smoke alarms let people know that fires are happening so they can evacuate. So numbers of fires probably won't change no matter how good your smoke alarm program is. The thing you're looking for is probably number of successful evacuations. And just like we were talking with Justin, are we tracking that? Does your NFIRS records management system have a checkbox to say this person evacuated because of a smoke detector? We know we have an NFIRS box for smoke detector working, but we don't know if it caused an evacuation or if the person heard it. That would be really useful to know. You could check number of working smoke alarms in an area, right? That's kind of an impact thing. Do we know why there were no smoke alarms? Is it socioeconomic? They couldn't afford them? Is it because of a landlord issue, a regulatory challenge? They weren't working? Like these are questions that impact your intervention. Yep, those are all the things.
Yeah, and I would just add on this, and I'm sorry for my little
Please.
brain fog there as we go through this, but you know, this is also why you have to keep in mind what your goals are and make sure that you're matching your goals to your initiatives, to your outcomes, because when you say something like your smoke alarm installation initiative will never reduce the amount of fires, that depends on what's involved in your smoke alarm installation initiative. In some cases, it simply is. I mean, you might even still find some that are simply handing out smoke alarms. We don't see that as frequently anymore because it's just been proven not to be very effective. But it could be truly an installation event. Someone goes in, they're allowed in the home, they install the alarms. Thank you very much. Goodbye. In other cases, that installation, the engineering solution, is partnered with an educational component. All right, so you have a group of people who are doing the installing, another group of people who are talking with family members about, all right, do you know what the sound of the smoke alarm sounds like? Do you know how to react when you hear that sound? Do you know the difference between it sounding and the battery chirp? Do you have a family meeting place outside? You know, those kinds of things. Which help in the escape piece. There could also be some education that's connected to preventing the fires in the first place. It all depends on what's being provided.
Great point. Super great point. So a multimodal CRR initiative. And that's the intervention question. How are we going to try to impact this problem? Yeah. So we may be retreading some ground, so I'll do this fast, right? A primary intervention is we try to stop the thing from happening. That's we try to make it not be a fire, right? That when you're teaching kitchen safety, you're trying to make it where there's no fire. A secondary intervention is where you're trying to make it hurt less when it happens, right? So that's what our little graphic here, right? In some cases, you're trying to stop the car from crashing. In secondary interventions, you know the car is going to crash, but you're going to put on a seatbelt in the car so that when it crashes, they don't get ejected. A tertiary intervention is where we send an ambulance when you get ejected to take you to a hospital. So smoke alarms are a secondary intervention for the most part. When a fire happens, we want people to know about it so they can get out. If you couple it with fire safety education, you're coupling it with a primary intervention, trying to make sure the fire doesn't start in the first place. And there are a lot of engineering solutions for that as well. So you figure out where in the chain you're going to try to break it, or if you're going to target multiple spots on that chain. And then you're going to look at what happened. To the point earlier, and I thought this was a really good, I think it was, can't remember who said it. Was it Jennifer or Laura? Somebody said the propagation of the fire or the severity of the fire related to smoke alarms, right? Because early detection can reduce the amount of time the fire has to grow and make it a smaller fire. So if you were measuring fire size and severity, that could connect to smoke alarm programs pretty well, and that's a great point. But point being, if a decrease in number of fires came from a smoke alarm program and you weren't doing education, that might not be a relevant finding. Decreased number of casualties, right? Fewer injuries, that's a correlation, right? You installed a bunch of smoke alarms over here and you have 10% fewer casualties, injuries and deaths in that area than you did before. It's not a direct causal connection saying that this caused that, but it's a correlation. You did a thing and a thing changed that could be connected. Number of successful evacuations, that would be an even stronger correlation that I think you could start to say was causal. Number of working smoke alarms, again, is just an impact measurement. And then you have to be looking at things like confounding variables, and whether or not it's statistically valid. So if you have like a really slight change, you just want to be thoughtful about saying your program's amazing if you have 1 year worth of data and a minor 2% change, because that could just be a natural statistical variable. And confounding variables will be things like if you're doing a fall assessment program and you had 10,000 falls last year and you have 9,000 falls this year after implementation, but it turns out that 30% of your elderly population died in the last year and nobody moved, and those houses were bought and moved into by young families. That's a confounding variable. It will make it seem like there are fewer falls and you might think it's because of your fall assessment program, but it might not be. So you have to make sure you're thinking of other reasons why the the data changes. Anything to add there, Karen?
Yeah, I think along that same idea of the falls, for example, if you do a falls prevention program, and let's say that one of your data points is about people reporting a fall to their doctor, which, you know, is one of those things that we talk about. After doing a falls prevention program, that number might increase, whether reporting to their family members or reporting to their doctors, not because they're falling more, but because they used to hide it. And through your initiative, they've learned that it's really important to communicate about this and share with other people that it's going on. So you do have to really kind of peel away the layers and look at things like that.
Tremendous point. This is where we open up for question. That's our contact information if you ever want to tell us things or talk to us. We like to hear things and talk to you. And Leonard, thanks for letting us do a run through on this. It was helpful.
Yeah.
We would love to hear any feedback that you have about things that didn't make sense, didn't flow. We both have really, really thick skins, so you can say probably whatever you want.
Well, thank you all. Do y'all expect, like, when you're trying to get the audience participation in the live format, what's your all strategy in drawing that out?
Great question. So
Like, is it going to be written and they're going to submit it like we've
No,
been doing?
yeah.
Or
It's going to be conversational, and I've done a lot of conference things, and the CPSC rooms are usually pretty well set up for it.
Yeah.
So we'll I think we have just the right amount of material, so that turned out nice for that conversation to happen. I want people to be able to think it through and have the time to really tell us what their programs are. We're not going to let audience members take over the conversation, but we want to be applying these tools to their programs instead of talking about what we do where we're from, because that's not useful to anybody necessarily. Anything to say there, Karen?
Yeah, no, I see where Leonard is going with that, and I'm wondering if there is chart paper in the room, we may want to just plop some of those up there on a piece of chart paper with their ideas, because some people really thrive with the visual.
I dig. Maybe I'll email Kelly and ask if we can get some.
Justin,
Go
I
ahead.
had a brief comment if you have a moment.
We do. We love comments.
So first, appreciate you putting this on. Something our groups talked a lot about with CFAI, which is obviously kind of a bigger conversation than just today, is trying to balance understanding and seeing how the CRR champions are measuring outcomes, like specifics of how they're doing it. But obviously understanding and knowing you shouldn't just copy and paste, right? You need to evaluate your community, see what makes sense in your community. But I feel like agencies do better measuring outcomes when they know what outcomes are being measured by other agencies.
Sure.
So I don't know if there's a way to incorporate as part of this, or if that's kind of a bigger, broader conversation than just this training topic. But I know we've had a lot of talk about that. You use fire suppression, right? Maybe it's, well, you got there quick and you have a lot of people, but you burnt it to the foundation. So how do you know your program's effective? Well, there's the time of water on the fire. There's the percentage saved versus lost. There's confined to the room of origin. But in our pub ed programs, kind of our other programs, I think a lot of us struggle with what are departments using to measure outcomes, like specifically, not conceptually, but like specifically.
Yeah.
So anyway,
And
just a thought.
that's a great comment. And my theory is this is my instructional theory, and my philosophy. One of the things that the mistake I've made in the past with a lot of teaching is that I give the answers, and then people walk away like, all right, this is what we're doing. We're just going to copy what they're doing. And so I found that people, while they don't like it as much, they learn a lot better when they leave with questions instead of answers. And our goal here is to make them think, how am I measuring my stuff from my community? And is it working? And go find more information and expand what they know about it. Because if we say, hey, just measure this, here's a metric you can use for fire alarm, for smoke alarms. Then they'll be like, all right, we saw at the conference. This is how you do it. It's the way you do it. And I'm specifically not trying to teach best practices, and that especially because CPSC, that's the whole model, right? Is you have to do what's right for your community based on their needs, not just a thing that you heard at a conference that you thought was pretty cool and maybe you could steal it and save some time. So your comment is well taken, and you're absolutely right. But that's the theory behind why it is the way it is. And it may or may, you're right, it's a really big conversation.
No, I agree and understand. And like I said, that's probably not your target you're going for with this presentation. But it's just something our consortium's talked a lot about of our agencies continuously get beat up about outcomes, and we go to this training, we read the documents, and then sometimes, right, you just have to like see how the bread's made by somebody.
Yep.
To kind of understand what you need to do back in your home organization. And hopefully you're not just ripping off and duplicating, right? But
yeah. And so we're hoping to get them to make a little slice of bread in this session and maybe crack the door and get that aha moment for somebody. So that they're like, oh, okay, I see what I'm supposed to do.
But good presentation. Appreciate your time. Not, this was kind of a bigger, broader conversation probably than just this presentation, but just thought I'd offer that feedback a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man.
No,
Thanks,
I
Justin.
appreciate it, Justin. And Landon, it makes me wonder if we should maybe include one solid example of, not to say like, this is what this one does, but then say, all right, so let's talk about what about this makes it a rich outcomes focused way to assess.
Yeah. Here's a question for the group. And Karen, I think we talked about this, or maybe I just thought about it. What would you think if there was a handout that was like a one-sheet case study example? Here's what it looks like in action with all the actual, we'd use like mock data, but they could look at it and take it with them and say, here's how it happens from A to Z. Do you think that would be a valuable resource for them to walk away from it with?
I do. In my crazy brain, Justin's not going to like this, but
Or another option is maybe have a QR code and a link to a Google Doc of a case study, because let's face it, so for when I go to conferences, yes, I'm collecting these things, but the handouts usually get lost in the shuffle.
Fair point. Yeah, digital resources.
Yeah, we can make it digital, but I'm just also wondering, like, is there a way to do it to give the answer, but not necessarily, I don't know, I have to work through this. I'm thinking of a scenario that isn't something somebody can just say and just plunk it into their own document, but gives them the opportunity of walking through a case study. But maybe it's about making pizza or something completely unrelated. I'm into it. Yeah, I knew you would be. But
so I'm thinking, like, since you mentioned it in the beginning of the presentation of a lot of departments kind of struggle to include it or forget to include it as part of their standard metrics in their accreditation documents, maybe having, like, without naming the department, a sample recommendation you have issued on that front,
Sure.
or also tying it into, because a lot of folks are attending the conference trying to figure out how to do this for accreditations, like maybe call out which performance indicators are affected by this.
Sure.
And say,
That's a great point.
these PIs aren't just for emergency response. These PIs are also applicable to public ed, applicable to fire inspections, applicable to, because I'm like, hey, accreditation is not just for emergency ops, it's the full picture of the department.
Mhm.
And a lot of the metrics, everyone focuses on, I think overly focuses on response times. And if you want me to do an hour soapbox on why I think that's short-sighted, that's a different story, but try to demonstrate, hey, there's more than response times you're supposed to be tracking for this
Mhm.
effort.
True story. That's a great point. I will find a way to get more specific about which PIs. That's good because it's 5B4 maybe.
But there's
Yeah.
also Cat 2.
Yep. Yeah, the entirety of Cat 2.
And also the tech spec guide also has like, hey, these are the metrics that you should be tracking, and it covers more than just emergency ops, although they rarely update that document.
Yeah. All right. That's great feedback.
And just the same, not to speak for you, but I think you guys did a good job in a couple of those slides of hitting home the difference between outputs versus outcomes, you know, and
Yeah.
so many times it's, here's our program appraisal, it's our annual report. Well, that's everything you did. That's not telling us if it's working or not working, or, you know. So
Amen,
really,
brother.
if that's probably I would say one of your goals probably to hopefully accomplish within that session is they walk out of there knowing the difference between outputs and outcomes, you know.
If that's all that
I like
happens,
that
I'll take it.
moment.
Yeah. I hope you come and assess us, is all I'm saying, because I'm picking up what you're putting down.
So Landon, when is Spraying Fire going to be due up?
Well, it's going to be 11th edition, but barely, I think. 27 or 28 is my guess.
All right. Anything else? Any other questions for Landon and Karen?
I have a question for you, Leonard.
Yes.
Is that a toaster oven behind you?
Yes. I make cookies in the office.
Living your best life, buddy.
Yeah, I love that you make cookies in your office. Just make sure your papers aren't too close to that, okay?
I know. It's there's fire watch here.
Brings me back to an office episode, right?
Yeah.
I also bought $85 worth of chocolate because it was $85 to get free shipping after Christmas.
Hey, you do what you got to do.
And that's how I bribe our hazmat team to talk to me.
Nice, man.
Very good then.
Well,
So
thanks for having us,
anyways,
man. So back
Thank
to you.
everyone.
The Excellence Conference is the first full week, well, not really the first full week, April 1st through the 4th. April 1st to the 4th. I've requested we'll have it hybrid for those that can't attend in person. But we'll have our elections as well as just overview on what we've learned and feedback on how the hearings went. There are 2 departments from Texas that are due up for the hearings. That's Shepherd Air Force Base and South Lake Fire Department.
Hey, Leonard, sorry to interrupt you, man. I got to jump on. I have a pure team kickoff actually at
All right.
1. So
And that's pretty much it. So
yeah.
I'll
Well,
see
you
y'all
can keep
then.
going.
All right.
Thank you all for
Thanks,
joining.
everyone.
And I'll send out the recording to the full list. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.